If you want to feel more loved, more connected, and better understood in your relationship, there are two tried and true ways to get there. One promises relaxation and rejuvenation, while the other one offers private assessment and intervention. But which one is better? There's no real right answer. I'm Laura Silverstein, a certified Gottman method couples therapist, and today I'm going to help you understand the key differences so that you can choose whether or not a couples retreat or traditional weekly or bi-weekly therapy is a better fit specifically for you and your situation. My grandmother used to say there's not only one way to get to Texas. And so what we know is that if you're looking to feel more connected, better understood, closer, all of those are things that you can get from both couples therapy and a retreat. But it just is a different way to get there. The good news is you can't really go wrong because they're both backed by science and they both have proven results. This video will be divided into 3 separate sections. So we're going to start off just with a very brief overview of each of the different modalities. And then the second section is really the biggest one. And that's where I'm going to be comparing and contrasting 7 specific features, including effectiveness, financial commitment, time commitment, educational approach, learning environment, accessibility, and privacy. And I'll be looking at similarities and differences with each one of those subcategories. Then in the third section, I'm going to help you decide which one is best for you. And that's either none, one, or maybe even both. Okay, so those are the 3 sections. At the very end of the video, I'm going to share with you what my husband and I decided for ourselves, because we also need to keep our relationship super healthy. And I'll tell you why we decided what we decided. You might not know that I am married to another Gottman couples therapist. So we have both facilitated a ton of these workshops, been doing therapy, combined couples therapy for over 50 years. And we've also been participants in both couples therapy and in retreats. So we'll give you the breadth of our experience, which hopefully will give you a barrier to decide what's best for you. Okay, let's get started. So traditional couples therapy is a process where you start with an assessment and then you move to either weekly or bi-weekly therapy, and sessions are usually 50 to 80 minutes long. Traditional therapy, you want to be making sure that you're choosing a therapist who has highly advanced training in couples therapy, not somebody who just does therapy and offers couples therapy in addition to what they normally do. And then couples retreats are structured weekend getaways where you have facilitators who are licensed, either licensed therapists or relationship experts, people who are giving you skills that are backed by science. And a retreat is a structured, usually 3-day experience away somewhere beautiful, probably up in the mountains or on the ocean. And you're getting a combination of workshops and breakout groups with other couples. And usually the therapists will rove around as you're doing your breakout sessions so that you'll be talking privately with your partner. And then you can raise your hand, or some have a little sign that say, "Come help me." And then we as the couples therapists come over, sit down next to you so that you're not sharing private information with other couples, but you are jointly listening to the lectures and the group discussions. Couples retreats usually have entertainment in the evenings. They're often included at a spa environment where there's food and lodging included, maybe walks to waterfalls and stuff like that. Whereas traditional couples therapy is going to be happening in a private office where nobody can hear what you're talking about, and you have a very specific agenda and treatment plan that you've worked out specifically with your therapist. Okay, let's go on to section number 2, which is the compare and contrast part of this video. And so I want to start with effectiveness. Research has shown that both weekend workshops and couples therapy are highly effective in terms of increasing connection, communication, conflict management, and overall relationship satisfaction. A study done by the Gottman Institute found that 94% of participants in their weekend workshops showed positive results, and those results were maintained. They did follow-up studies as well. Couples therapy, EFT, emotionally focused therapy, did an outcome study, and they found that 70 to 75% of people maintained progress up to 2 years afterwards. So basically, for couples, you've got 94% positive results. For traditional couples therapy, you have 70 to 75%. What we do know is that both of these things work, and both of these things are definitely better than doing nothing. That's highly supported by the data. Okay, so now feature number 2 is financial commitment. Couples retreat and couples therapy are going to be a significant financial commitment, but it's a little bit different because with a couples therapy retreat, you have a much, much bigger upfront lump sum cost. You might be able to have a payment plan, but still you're paying for the time of the instructors, you're paying for lodging, and you're paying for food, and you're paying for travel to go to and from wherever the destination of the retreat is. Couples therapy, on the other hand, is a more drawn out kind of financial commitment where you pay weekly or bi-weekly. Sometimes couples therapy is covered by insurance. Sometimes it is not, depending on your specific insurance. You might be able to submit and get a certain percentage of what you pay your therapist back, or you might even be able to find somebody that's in network. So if you have insurance, then you might have a benefit in that couples therapy might be more financially affordable than a retreat, because retreats are not covered by insurance. They're considered educational instead of mental health treatment. Okay, so number 3 is time commitment. Couples therapy and retreats require a significant commitment to carving out time in your schedule, carving out time where your cell phones are off and your obligations are taken care of, meaning that if you have children, there's childcare in place or pet care in place. If there's work, that your calls and emails are being forwarded accordingly. But with a retreat, you have a block of time that's much more intense, and that's going to work better for some people's schedules where it's basically 3 days in a row. You've got one person taking care of your kids or something like that. Whereas with traditional couples therapy, you're going to want to make sure that you've got that consistent time blocked off. If you start skipping sessions or canceling sessions, you're going to lose that momentum. And so for some people, you're going to think about your schedule. For some people, that block of 3 days in a row is a real advantage because you don't have life knocking on your door to the same extent. But for other people, it's a lot easier to say, okay, I can get a babysitter, once a week versus somebody that's going to be spending the night with my kids. Okay, so that is one of the biggest considerations I would say in terms of the differences. Now, I want to talk to you about the difference in educational approach and learning styles. Both of these will be giving you tools and skills. You'll be learning strategies. You'll be learning about what leads to relationship health and what leads to divorce and separation. You'll be learning concrete communication skills, at least if you're doing Gottman method. We do a lot of communication skill building with both private couples therapy and also with retreats. But the difference is that when you go to a retreat, you don't get to set your own agenda or the style of learning. Okay, so at a retreat, you're going to have a lecture format, but when you go to the lecture, you're going to learn what the facilitators have in store for you. With couples therapy, you have a lot more control over exactly what you want to be working on and talking about. You come in with an agenda, and you are going to be working on the goals that you come in and say, this is what I want couples therapy for, and then your therapist will help you reach those goals. With both approaches, you're really going to be focused on strengths. That's another really good thing to keep in mind. In traditional couples therapy, you're going to still be working on strengths, but you're going to be talking about having fun. So your therapist might say, make sure you're having date nights. But you don't have the accountability. It's not like, okay, we're all going, for a walk to the waterfall at 1:00. You have to schedule the date night, do it yourself. Okay, so fun, especially, is something that you would have to carve out time for alone when you're in the traditional therapy. And one of the risks for relationship health is that things get lopsided and you focus more on the problems than the good stuff. And so that's really important thing to remember. If you're thinking about your own relationship and it tends to be maybe a little more negative than positive, a retreat might be a better approach. However, if you're one of those couples that brushes a lot of things under the carpet and just has a lot of fun together, couples therapy might be a better fit to make sure that you're, stopping, slowing down to make sure that you're addressing some of those problem areas. Okay, number 5 is learning environment. So in a couples therapy retreat, you're going to be in a beautiful location. You're going to have just less cortisol pumping through your brain and your blood just because you're not running into your therapy appointment after you had a big work crisis. The learning environment at a retreat is much more calm and beautiful and romantic. There's romantic dinners. You know, with the retreats that my husband and I do, we don't feed you guys dinner so that you can go out on a date and have a romantic dinner where you don't want Michael and Laura sitting talking to you about anything. So the romantic location does a lot, regardless of what you're learning in the workshops all day. The learning environment in a traditional couples therapy environment is much quieter, right? You're not going to be overhearing other couples. It's much more like clinical, and there's a clearer start and stop time. It's shorter, obviously, so 50 or 80 minutes. So that's the differences in learning environment. Next, I want to talk about accessibility, because this is a big factor and it's much more practical, right? So obviously, couples retreats are going to be in a private location, like I said. So that's might not be possible for you to get all the way from to and from. You need to think about things like, what is the terrain? If you have mobility issues, what's that going to be like in terms of making sure that the resort that you're going to is accessible to you. Couples therapy offices are going to be much more accessible. They'll probably be near public transportation. The reason many people come to couples retreats when they talk to me is that they say that they just weren't able to find, they didn't have a highly trained relationship expert in their area. So while it might be more convenient in terms of like it's right next door, you might not have somebody who is highly trained in your area where you happen to live, in which case the accessibility means going to finding where you can get the help that you need. Hopefully you can find somebody who's on your plan and takes your insurance and lives in your state. So usually accessibility is a little bit easier with traditional couples therapy, a little more difficult or more of a commitment with the retreats. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about is privacy. So with both approaches, you're not going to be expected to share your private business in a group environment. You might choose to share some insights and get into a group discussion, but in terms of when you're doing the breakout exercises or you're working on your relationship communication, you're going to be talking privately to your partner in a corner, like picture like 2 chairs set up kind of next to each other so that you're talking. But a few feet away, there's probably going to be another couple who's doing the same thing. So that's really important to know if you have some highly sensitive information that you don't want anyone else to hear. That's something to consider in terms of a couples retreat. In a couples therapy environment, you're going to be absolutely guaranteed much more privacy and confidentiality. But that is a reason why sometimes people feel a little bit more comfortable with couples therapy if there's very private things they want to talk about, or maybe they just are more private in general. Then the semi-private group discussions is something that can be very, very powerful on the flip side, because you're listening to other people. And the main benefit of that is realizing that you're not alone. Everybody thinks they're alone. Everybody thinks, Laura, how did you know we talk to each other like this? I'm like, because it's a very, very common pattern. Not to say that you're not unique, because of course you're unique. But when you go, there's nothing that I can say to convince people how normal their issues are, because they just think I'm being nice. But when you're in another group where people are like, oh my gosh, I do this and so do that, and this is so helpful, then all of a sudden you're just kind of like this big team of people looking at a very common problem together. And many, many people say that they just feel so much better hearing other people. And sometimes you have young couples that bring in new insights, and then you have couples that have been married for over 40 years and they're really inspiring, but still learning from the young couples. It's amazing. Same gendered couples talking to, heterosexual couples and realizing how many similarities everybody has and differences too, but it's the similarities that make us feel just more connected and more comfortable and relaxed. Okay, so that's my list. Those are the pros and the cons of all these different factors of those two ways of getting help. Also, I made a little quiz for you guys, so you can go check the link in the description and answer a bunch of questions, and then you'll get specific recommendations about couples therapy, free resources, retreats, all that kind of stuff will be dependent on what you answer. So basically, here's what I want to say. Go for couples therapy if you want an individualized treatment plan. With couples therapy, you've got the couples therapist yourself. Also, couples therapy is better for you if you need a structured support to work through deep-seated issues. Something like betrayal, something like trauma, something like addiction. Okay, those are what we call the big three. If you have one of those, it's really better to go to individualized traditional couples therapy. The educational aspect of a couples retreat isn't going to be able to help you with some of those big things. Another reason for couples therapy over a retreat is if you're the kind of couple who needs help with follow through and consistency and you need accountability. In that case, you can go and have a wonderful weekend and feel really inspired, but then after maybe 3 or 4 months, you kind of lose what you've learned, and then you'd be better off going to couples therapy and making sure that you have accountability and homework. The other reason for traditional couples therapy is if your lifestyle just isn't conducive to taking the weekend off. And if you like the idea of connecting with other people, if you like the idea of community and talking to other people, meeting other people who share similar issues, definitely the couples retreat. If you want to hit the reset button, a retreat is a perfect example for that. And if you want to go to one or the other, couples therapy and couples therapy retreats are not indicated for everyone. So for some of you, I'm actually going to recommend that you don't do either. And so if you think you might be in an abusive relationship, what you should do in that situation is go to an individual licensed professional and have that person talk to you individually. You might need a plan to get out, and you might need some more information about to discern your own safety. If you don't have access to that, please go ahead and call the 1-800 number in your area for domestic violence. There's national numbers, there's international numbers, and depending on where you're located, go ahead and make that phone call. The other reason not to do either is if you're not both committed to learning, growing, and changing. Don't drag somebody to this. It's not going to work. It's going to be frustrating and overwhelming. So now we've done one, none, and the third is both. Definitely do both if you both have the time, if you both love the idea, if it's fun for you, if it's interesting for you, if you are like my husband and I, and you're kind of like psychology nerds and you really enjoy self-growth, then both of those things can be fantastic, and you'll find that it's not an overlap. You'll get different things and a totally different kind of learning and experience if you do both. If you're already in therapy and you're trying to figure out whether a retreat would be helpful, here's what I recommend. Talk to your couples therapist about it, because a lot of it is going to be timing, especially if you're dealing with one of the big three. So if you're dealing with trauma, betrayal, or addiction, ask your couples therapist, when would be a good time to do this? If you're in couples therapy and you understand that the retreat is not the place to be doing the deep dive, but more of the place to be remembering why do you love each other and what's awesome about each other, and have a romantic dinner together, knowing that you're going to have certain topics that are off the table and that those are really, really better for when you have a private person who's right there in the room with you. Okay. So now I promised you that I was going to talk to you about my husband and I, because we have done both couples therapy and retreats, both as facilitators co-facilitators. And also we have been in couples therapy because obviously we care very much about our relationship. And if we were to get divorced, that would be really bad for business. Just kidding. I mean, not kidding, but we're in a good place. Anyway, so what Michael and I have been doing is we run retreats together twice a year because we find that when we run the retreats together, we get all the same benefits, right? It's contagious to be around people who are learning and growing and doing these positive exercises where they're talking about what they like and love, they're practicing empathy, they're talking about intimacy. So for us, hands down, it's the couples retreat that works best for us, and we want to keep doing them for the rest of our lives. We're hoping that it's kind of our long-term retirement plan. And what we do is even though we made up these exercises, I wrote them in my workbook and then we've tweaked them and practiced along the way and we keep changing them. But even though we made up these exercises, we sit down and do them because we have to do things like time. Oh, how long does it take to do this exercise? So we always do the exact exercises before we make our couples do it who come on the retreat. And then we always kind of look at each other and laugh and say like, oh, this really worked. Like, I feel really better. That was so sweet. Or sometimes we end up sharing something and we feel like so close. Whereas all we were really doing was trying to time, oh, how long does it take to do this? Like fill in the blank love letter and blah, blah, blah. And the next thing you know, we're like, oh, that's so sweet. So for us, I think that's proof of concept that it's not about learning new skills. We already know these skills. It's about practicing them. It's about consistently repeating them over the course of many, many decades if you want to be married for many, many decades. Or if you're in a relationship with somebody for a year and you want that to be the best year ever, it's repeating. I hope this helped. I've got a couple of free resources for you guys that I hope is going to be helpful if you can't afford either a couples retreat or couples therapy. Check out my videos. I've got one on the attack, defend, communication cycle. And I would say that is probably the best place to start because it's the single most frequent communication problem is criticism and defensiveness and how to actually use a tried and true formula to avoid that and have a productive conversation. Hope that helps. If you want to learn about the retreats that are coming up, I've got them down in the description box, or if you want a 15-minute consult to talk about whether this is a good approach for you, I'd be happy to do that. And I hope you have an awesome day.